baby beard.
Waited for you, Fry.
This episode traumatized me as a young person.
My head is hurting again.
Where's my firstborn son?
God does not care about me masturbating.
Your singing is bad and you should feel bad.
First get out into a bus, so you're like, oh no!
Yeah, I don't like myself becoming the protagonist of this podcast.
You've been in
Yeah, because you haven't learned anything.
Shut up and take my podcast. Yes, welcome everybody once again to a solo version. Are you eating chips, Raymie?
No, I'm not.
Oh, I've already come out with an attack on you. I'm sorry. I just heard a crunch. Maybe it's on my end and I'm not aware of it.
Okay.
Good. We're off to
no food objects around me on purpose.
I say this, but last week I was eating chocolate during the episode, so we have I shouldn't be berating you for something that I'm guilty of.
I see.
Welcome.
You know what?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you.
Oh no.
But I think the chair is creaking, so that might be what you hear.
That's all right. It gives the podcast character.
Okay.
No, it gives a character. We're all about our flaws here. So, guys, welcome everybody to Shut Up and Take My Podcast, the Futurama podcast that pits episode against episode in a bloody, glorious gauntlet battle for your entertainment. And this is a side mission where we deviate from our regularly scheduled programming to give you something a little different because you're worth it. And as promised, I'm sorry I did lie to you last week, but I promised one Raymie, and I did bring you a Raymie. Hello, Raymie. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm doing good actually. It's I don't know what it's like in LA, but we have just started winter, and it has just started kind of fluctuating between perpetual torrential rainfall and sunny skies. So that's Adelaide in a nutshell, really.
Wow. Okay. Well, here we got the June gloom, and it started early this year and continues.
Oh, damn it. Well, have you just started summer? Am I right on that, or am I very wrong?
I believe we have. Somebody mentioned summer, and it's like I kind of dread it, especially with global warming. LA can really get uncomfortable in the summer, so I'm hoping that it doesn't show up at all, but I'm sure it'll drop by sometime.
But global warming's not a thing, Raymie. Didn't you hear?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'm sorry.
We won't get political. That's all right. So for those of you that are not aware, I will just give a more deserving introduction. So he is an Emmy and an Annie-nominated director. He's worked on such shows as The Simpsons, Rugrats, Duckman, and Clarence. For Futurama, he's directed episodes including The Da Vinci Code, The Mutants Are Revolting, Da Vinci Code, my mistake, The Mutants Are Revolting, and The Tip of the Zoidberg. And he has a last name that I just consistently get wrong, even though I've been told the correct one. It's Raymie Muzquiz. How are you? Again.
Oh, wow. Well, that was well pronounced.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was Stephen, another director who I had his name wrong for about a year. Stephen Sandoval, who finally let me know. And then Frank reiterated it when I asked him as well, because Frank has the best last name to pronounce. So I get a welcome change between the two. So it's Muzquiz.
I have my hats off to my colleagues for knowing that.
And yeah, first of all, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I do appreciate it. It is just me. We are doing solo once again, so it seems to be once again a more intimate, personal sit down with Sean interrogation or interview rather. I won't say interrogation. That'll scare you off, but. Basically, Raymie, you've listened to some of the ones that we've done before, but what we've tried to do on this podcast now is endeavored to kind of shine a light on the creative side of things and looking at some of the directors and writers and kind of what brought them to the table, not just your time on Futurama, but before that. So what we've really tried to do is really look at behind the scenes and look kind of what went into and who went into creating this popular little sci-fi show that could.
Gotcha.
So really, what I'd love to do is I would love to start from the very beginning. What I'm really interested in is more so when people say, and then I got my first gig here, and then I got my first professional gig here, and it's more like, okay, but how? As far as your upbringing is concerned, storyboarding and drawing and writing and those kind of artistic endeavors something that you aspired to as a child, or did you have a different path? Like, kind of, what was your experience as a kid, kind of growing up, and in terms of that relationship?
There was certainly a lot of drawing. I really enjoyed doing that. I feel like cartoons were in my blood, and I really enjoyed, especially drawing the cartoons I saw on television. Just making things on a bunch of sheets of paper, like typing paper. I had that, and Bic bananas. And do you know what a Bic banana is?
I don't, but I'm very intrigued.
Oh, okay. It was like it's like in the era of Peter Max and Screaming Yellow Zonkers and stuff like that. Bic made a yellow pen, but it was, it came in all kinds of colors, but the shaft was yellow, and it was dubbed the Bic banana. And I absolutely loved those. So I did a lot of drawing, and career-wise, I don't believe I really wanted to be in cartoons, especially when I started thinking about what school I was going to. And I actually, back in the pre-internet days, I wrote and then subsequently phone called Cal Arts to see if I could get a catalog and find out what happened there and how I could apply. And they never replied back to me.
That seems like how it is now as well. That's the thing that always interests me, because Stephen talked about he happened to know someone that worked there, and that's how he just got kind of in the door, and he got a sit down kind of interview with them almost. But I think I hear a lot of stories about people would just, did they really have a lot of calls for send in your portfolio, or did you just kind of have to almost have an in, so to speak?
I have no idea. I knew that there was a place somewhere called Cal Arts, and that it had something to do with Walt Disney. It was founded by Walt Disney, and it sounded like, wow, that sounds like an interesting thing to find out about. But I didn't learn a thing. So I decided it's like, well, screw them. I'm going to go follow my other passion, which was live action. I was really into, photography, and I made a lot of Super 8 movies. Some of them were model animation, and being incredibly naive, I wanted to find a college pretty easly, and I went to the same place that Frank went to, which was San Diego State.
Right. Okay. And when around. Was that in the 80s? Would I be right?
That would be, yes, you would be correct. I was in there. Yeah, I graduated in 85, I think.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I wanted to see whether, actually, I'll come back to that in a second. But yeah, you graduated from this college and with the intention of pursuing kind of. Did you know what in the industry? Was it storyboarding, or did you have your kind of sights set on something different? Because you mentioned live action and such.
Yeah, so it was live action, and I guess my internal me, I would be, I would say I wanted to be a director of live action, but I always was cagey about it if anyone asked. So I would say that I wanted to be a cinematographer. So I never really followed cinematography seriously, apart from just doing things with a Super 8 camera.
So it's funny you mentioned that. I wanted to see if this rings any bell, and tell me if you're aware of what this project is.
Love can be deadly when the attraction is fatal.
Why don't we have a little fun?
From Roger Corman comes an explosive thriller starring All My Children's Kim Delaney.
Does that ring any bells to you at all?
I didn't hear anything.
Oh, did you not hear anything? Oh, no.
No, it was no.
Well, the audience will hear it, but what I played was a clip from a lovely 1988 Roger Corman film called The Drifter.
Oh my gosh.
Which, if IMDB is to be believed, but it has burned me before with Frank Marino, it said that not only were you involved with the still photography, but you also involved in craft services.
Exactly. That was the deal at Roger Corman, was to sweeten the the job of craft service, they would also let you be the still photographer. And I have no confidence that they use anybody's photos. I think it was just to make you feel a little better about brewing coffee at 5 a.m. and, cutting celery stalks and stuff.
How did you get involved in a Roger Corman film?
Okay, so after I went to San Diego State, I got accepted to the American Film Institute, again, still thinking I was going to be in live action. And I met a student there. She was a producing fellow. I was a directing fellow. And her name is Sally Madison. And she managed to get a position after AFI as Roger Corman's personal assistant, or like maybe something a little higher than that. But she answered directly to him. And at some point, she even got to direct a slasher film for him. But anyway, she was my door, open door to get into Roger Corman.
That is crazy. What was it like working on that kind of film set? Because I watched the trailer for it. It looks bonkers, but also fantastic to work on.
It was wonderful, but it was like, it's not something that I would, I would wish on anybody to do like as a career. It was every film shoot that I was on was like 14 days. That was to make a feature, and the studio, if you weren't on location, and we did a lot of location shooting, but if you're the studio itself was an abandoned lumber yard. And I mean, it was like, it was just very rattle trap, mud puddle, stacks of just like all exposed to the elements, wooden flats and just lumber. And it was in Venice, and it was nearly impossible to park. And it looked like you were taking your life in your hands, just walking from your car to get in the studio. It was very crazy there.
That sounds amazing. So you wouldn't, I'm assuming, ooh, here's one for you. Would you work for Roger Corman again?
Would I work for him?
Yeah.
Is that the question?
Yes. Would you work on a Roger Corman film?
Huh. Golly. It was like, dang. That's like asking if, I don't know, if I'd want to drive a steam locomotive or something. It just seems like it's such an old paradigm. It was like I got to meet him. He was always he said very nice things about my craft service, but he did seem like he was just very, very disconnected from the day-to-day running of the studio. He was off. He was not around an awful lot, and it was a grind. It was just like, it's like the stories were never very good. The crew, we were all very hardworking and dedicated and skillful, and yet the material was just so poor. And then usually the person who was directing was the least qualified person on the set. So that was always, that just made things, intolerable. What was it? There was another element that I was going to bring up. It was just, oh yeah. There would always be like one star, somebody whose career had kind of faded, and they would be the headliner. And then, they would be put in some embarrassing, moldy smelling room as their dressing room. and it was a bit of a carnival.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting as well, because I mean, he's 93 now, and he's still making films as far as I can see. He did a film with Universal. He produced it, but it was a parody of Death Race 2050, I believe it's called.
Oh, Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah, that's amazing.
So, I mean, from what I can see is, at least after Drifter, it wasn't too many years until you started working on, you got into storyboarding, specifically Bobby's World. There was at least one episode for a TV show called Bobby's World. I'll play the clip, but it depends if you'll be able to hear it or not. So we'll see.
Well, can I can stop you now. It's
Yeah.
like I didn't work on Bobby's World.
Oh, it's a goddamn IMDb.
IMDb gotcha.
It credits you as a storyboard artist in 1990 for one episode called Uncle Ted's Excellent Adventure.
No kidding. No, that's a mystery to me.
All right, well, IMDb strikes again.
Yes.
Well, I mean that becomes an interesting thing for me, because it seems like over the next couple of years you worked on shows like Garfield and The Simpsons as well, both in a storyboard artist capacity. How did you start to make the transition from live action to animation, but more to the point, especially shows like The Simpsons in its very early run and established franchises like Garfield?
Well, Garfield is another show that is a mystery to me. I had nothing to do with that.
Oh, I hate IMDb. To hell with them.
The Simpsons was my first gig.
That was your first gig?
Yes, very first.
How?
That is just, it seems like lightning struck. You know, it's like that was a kind of miserable time in my life where I found that, you know, working doing Corman movies was going to kill me, and then other jobs that I could get were always kind of PA-ish, and you'd be lucky if it lasted a week. And I found myself in a more stable job, but it was so soul killing, and that was at a movie trailer company, and I was a coordinator there. And that was brutal. It was just sort of seeing like the worst aspects of show business, you know, just like the money, extravagant money being thrown about, and you know, the hierarchy and people being assholes, and it was just like the worst part of show business. And during that time, I would look in the Variety and the Hollywood Reporter to see if there were any ads. And there was one day, there was an ad in the Hollywood Reporter that had Homer and Marge in the ad. And it just said, you know, they're looking for artists. And I'd always storyboarded my live action projects in school. And that was my understanding of what live action was. And so I took a test, and I managed to get in, and then I realized, wow, storyboarding for animation is not like storyboarding for live action.
Yeah, right.
It was profoundly different.
What did you find were the major differences in terms of how you would approach storyboarding live action to animation?
So live action is just essentially, you know, creating the film language. So you could communicate to others, you know, where the camera was. You really didn't have to concern yourself with acting or gesture, or, you know, certainly, you know, the actors didn't have to be on model in live action storyboards. It was like a shorthand tool for me that no one really would ever see except myself and, you know, and whoever I was communicating ideas to. So, you know, and then storyboard for animation, it's like, man, those are the images you build on, you know, as it goes through the entire process. And so you have to have the composition, you have to have the characters on model. You know, it's like you should be putting your key poses in. It is really creating, you know, it's from the foundation up, what the image is.
Well, it's kind of, I believe, what Frank, or it was either Frank or Steven, they were saying that it was Steven, I'm pretty sure, where he says, you know, your shows live and die on those storyboards, basically.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. If you can master storyboard, then shoot, you know, it's like your career is made.
So I'm assuming your work on The Simpsons, and I feel like we need to play a game now where I mention shows and you let me know whether you were actually on that show or not. In fact,
Okay,
just
sounds
you know
good.
what? Let's do it. Let's see how much I need to write to IMDb about, because there can't be that many Raymie Muzquiz on IMDb,
No.
surely. So, Are Real Monsters?
I worked on the pilot.
Yeah. Okay.
I did one.
Okay. Let's. They've got you down for 2 episodes, so I'm going to talk to them about that. Rugrats.
Oh yeah, I did a lot of time on Rugrats.
Duckman.
Absolutely, I worked on Duckman.
And the final one that I am very interested about, Despicable Me.
I did work on that. However, it's just I feel it's dishonest to say that that I did, because they didn't use anything that I did.
They've got you credited as additional storyboard artist.
Yeah, that was a very, very interesting process. I don't know. Are you ready to talk about?
Oh, look,
Despicable Me?
let's jump straight down. Why not?
So, that was the first feature of Illuminated Entertainment. At least they're
kind of big budget, yeah.
Yeah, so this was their first project, and the artists were spread across the world. And if you were working on this project, it was first called Project E, and then it was called Evil Me. So Despicable Me caught me off guard when it finally showed up.
Huh.
Yeah, so the artists were spread all over the place. Nobody was actually under one roof, and they would only give you certain pages. Nobody had the entire script, and so it's like there would be things that I would be boarding, and it was all on a need-to-know basis. And any gags I came up with or staging or something, I would have a phone conversation, a conference call about, and they would say, "Oh, geez, that was a really funny gag, but that's in so-and-so section. Some guy is in Spain doing that part." And so it was really hard it explains itself. It's just sort of like if you have all these different people working and nobody knows what the other person is doing, it just seemed like it was a lot of wasted effort.
That sounds incredibly frustrating.
It was. And then even the character grew. At that point, he looked like Snape from Harry Potter.
So he had hair.
He was very.
So he had hair.
Yes, he did. Yeah, and then the character that became Gru, he was scaled down, so he was very squat, and I think they actually literally were calling him Igor at the time.
Right. That probably explains.
And there were no minions. The minions. So I could see that the minions filled the gap of Igor when Igor became Gru, and then Snape was out of a job.
That probably explains Despicable Me 3, which has Gru's brother, long lost brother, who does have long flowing blonde hair and I mean, potentially that's a callback. I don't want to make that assumption, but it seems like it could possibly be.
It could be possible, yes.
That's crazy that the minions weren't kind of a part of the initial concept, and they pretty much became what they built the franchise on top of after that first film.
Yes. So I think at the point I worked on it, it was just Chris Renaud. Am I pronouncing his name correctly?
Oh, let's say yes.
Chris Renaud or Chris Renaud. So I met with him once. I took a drive over to the West Side and met with him for a little bit, but he was a sole director when I was doing my sequences. And then like a year later, when it did come out, he was sharing the directing position with
Pierre Coffin,
somebody else. Yes. And all those changes happened. So I'm not sure if it was the second director who brought the minions in. I don't know.
Huh. That's great. Well, I'll jump back, and what kind of next interests me is when you started making the jump from storyboard artist to director, because I'm imagining once again the difference between, well, I know the difference between directing live action to directing animation is worlds apart. You'd been doing storyboarding for a number of years, so was it still a massive shock to the system? And what was it like when you started making that transition into directing? Did it come naturally to you because you'd spent years kind of around that process, or was it still a huge learning curve?
There was still a huge learning curve. It's that sudden kind of, you feel like you've lost control instead of being in charge when you're a storyboard artist of just your little bit, and you can pour all your creativity in it. You're suddenly more of a manager, so you're trying to shepherd everybody to create a vision. And I guess you have to kind of what I had learned was well, it can't be my vision. I can steer the ship as much as possible, but still it's like you kind of have to incorporate all these other people's vision. It's like, and in the most diplomatic way, and under the time constraints, you try to make it into a coherent whole. So it's like, I think Frank mentioned this in his interview. It's that sense that you start out and you just want to be the auteur and draw everything over again, and it's like, of course, that is just unsustainable.
Yeah.
And so you have to have to sort of lay the foundation out and let these people play in your yard in this foundation, and then just kind of steer them into a whole. Of course, there are revisions and stuff that happen, but you've got to. You have to share creativity much more than if you're just a storyboard artist. It's like, certainly the director will tell you, I like this, I don't like that, and you have to change it. But when you're the director and you have four people, and they're all working on different parts at the same time, it's just like you really, really have to make a concerted effort to use as much as you can, and keep them included in the process.
I guess it's about picking your battles, isn't it? Is that if you be too hands-on and too nitpicky and micromanagey with everything, you're going to run out of time. So what's actually important that you really pour over and pick apart, as opposed to what you allow in the hands of the people around you.
Mm-hmm. No, that's well said.
So, and I guess that's another massive jump in itself when you started working on Clarence and Squirrel Boy, which is you then jumped to supervising director.
Mm-hmm.
Was that a whole nother world in itself, or what is the transition like to becoming a supervising director for a show?
Well, in the Cartoon at Cartoon Network, I should say, you're lucky if they have directors. So, so it's like I was given the title supervising director, but it's like there were no directors to supervise. So you're sort of like the Uber director, and it's just whatever process you would do, like we did on Duckman, on Futurama, those where you were just in charge of X amount of episodes in a show order. This one, it was just like every show that started, and usually these 11-minute shows would start every week. A new show was in the mix, and it was whatever I was dealing with before as a director, but just kind of like tenfold.
Right. Oh, so you're that much so you have to kind of be on top of every single episode as it's being made.
Correct.
Jeez. And I just want to pick that apart. So you're saying that Cartoon Network, when you say they don't really use directors, what is the kind of the creative culture like in a place like Cartoon Network that seems to be different from some of the other places you've worked for?
Part of the culture difference is that they like the idea of doing a story outline rather than a script, and that's not always true. But it's sort of like it's kind of handing over the show to the storyboard artists. It gives them a lot of control. They're creating the arc of the story and the dialogue and all that stuff. And so it's I think it's like herding cats, because it's like it's like you still have only so many weeks of storyboard, say 5 or 6 weeks of storyboard, and if you don't have if the story isn't distilled into a script and it's an outline, you could be going down a lot of blind alleys. And certainly I saw that a lot on Clarence, where the storyboard artists, God love them, they'd create huge storyboards, and sometimes the stories didn't really even have like a third act, or like it just seemed like it was a bunch of little details, and it just seemed like a lot of wasted effort and a lot of time passed, and it seemed unnecessarily stressful.
So for you,
for Duckman, sorry, not go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, keep going. For Duckman,
I was going to say on Squirrel. I accidentally said Duckman, but on Squirrel Boy, because Everett Peck, who created that show, came from previously did Duckman, and that was done in the traditional primetime animation mode of of a script. There's writer producers. It's very script driven. So he did scripts for Squirrel Boy, and that made things a little bit easier. Nevertheless, it was just like we had a new show starting every week, and so there was less going up blind alleys, but sometimes it was just like really, really hard to keep the quality up.
I was going to say, so for when you start coming on board as a supervising director for these shows, and you walk into a different way that these companies like to do things, is that something that you kind of approach with, okay, well, I'm just going to, despite having, at this point, I guess 20 years of experience or so, do you look to try and create the culture around what you know and trying to encourage change to something that is more sustainable and less like herding cats, as you say, or do you just try your best to fit within the framework of how they like to operate?
Yeah, it's pretty much the latter, because it's like the flavor of the show is really set up by the creator. And so at Cartoon Network, they have extremely young creators, and these people don't have a lot of experience, but they're full of energy, and and they'll bring all their friends in, and it's so you kind of have to you kind of have to fit in. I can't bring the culture. The culture's already there, and you kind of just have to try and shepherd it.
I guess that brings me on to a very important question in this show. Is I'll jump back because I have a few questions that I'll bring up about what we're talking about in Futurama. So how did you, Raymie, get on board Futurama? And what I'm really interested about is what was your relationship to Futurama before you came on board? Because obviously it had its first run and then it's coming back as a second series. Were you a fan of a show? Did you not really follow it? And how did you find yourself on board that show for Rough Draft?
I was not. It's not that I wasn't a fan of it. I don't know where I was. Maybe it's because I had young children at that time, but I feel like I didn't watch television that much. And I remember catching a couple episodes and being impressed by them, but I never followed it as a show. So I know you touched on this on in Frank's episode. It's and mentioning that Stevens was bold enough to admit that he didn't know the show very well, and that describes me perfectly. I didn't know the show that well.
And so, how did you end up getting involved with Futurama as a program?
I believe because I worked at Rough Draft on Drawn Together. So I did a few episodes there, and I didn't, I seem to have done good work, and I didn't make anybody upset or anything. So I was on the short list, and of course I knew Pete. Pete was like, I hired, I think maybe a week or two, or maybe a month before I did on The Simpsons. So we started very, very close, very closely on that first season of The Simpsons that we worked on.
And so I'll also just reiterate the reason I asked that question, and the reason it interests me is I'm not trying to get a soundbite of you saying I hated Futurama, it sucked. But like, it kind of interests me, especially with yourself and Frank and Steven coming on as directors solely for the second run, how much you would or would not be influenced by what has already been established as a franchise. It always interests me because it seems like, at least so far, using the three of you as an examples, neither of you really were that knowledgeable about the lore and the seasons that had come before it. So it seems like there wasn't really much in the way of a weight on you, so to speak, in terms of what you have to create with this second one. It seemed more freeing from what the others have said. Did you find that was the case for yourself as well?
I was always mindful that there was, a mythology that preceded the episodes that I directed. I just made it, I tried to just kind of keep myself aware when I'm reading the scripts that if there was anything that seemed like it might be a callback. I think the very, very first episode I directed included Morbo, who I didn't know from Adam. So it's just sort of like, it was important that I always touch base with Pete, who embodied the history of the show. I can't remember if they were available on the server then, or if we had to watch the episodes, but I would certainly try to watch any episodes Pete recommended if I brought up, if it seemed like it was cogent for the script. So I wouldn't say that I was felt freed, but I did feel that there was a responsibility to make sure that, I didn't pull a boner and, do something that was kind of off myth.
That's kind of interesting for me, because that's what I was just about to ask you was, did you find yourself going back and watching as much Futurama as you could? But so you really only stuck to episodes that were recommended, or ones that you could kind of just pick out, I don't understand this, so this probably has a tie to somewhere else. Because that becomes interesting when you did the tip of the Zoidberg, because up until that point, Zoidberg and Professor Farnsworth, their relationship hadn't really been touched on, at least in that capacity. And so that was really interesting for us to watch, because Tip of the Zoidberg was probably one of my favorite episodes of the season so far for that reason, because we hadn't, up until that point, interacted with those two characters and their relationship in that way.
So yeah, it's great that you can kind of mine the gaps. MINE, not mind the gap, but mine the gaps that might be in story canon, and insert that kind of history into it. I think that's wonderful.
When you're looking, and to an extent on Futurama, but also just your directing as a whole, when you're coming on board a TV show and you're starting to come on board as a director, do you have I guess either a goal or a way or something that you would consider you doing a job successfully, in terms of like, what do you try to bring to your episodes when you're directing? Does that make sense to you as a question? Because it only half did to me.
It does. It does. It's like if it's like a series is established, you want to make sure that you're not inserting too much, being too aggressive with the filmmaking if it is in a different style than what has been established. You kind of want to be able to I don't want to say necessarily fit in, but not seem like you're out of step, or you want to just maintain the flavor of it. If the show is brand new I feel like it's incumbent on me with the creators and such, like of Clarence, when I wanted to kind of to set the ground rules of what kind of style the show would have. Is it more mise-en-scene, or is it proscenium? Is it more filmmaking that's in depth and stuff like that? How broad is the acting? How dry is the wit? So it's anytime I'm starting a new show, I want to gauge that so I don't go too far off the beam.
Did you in terms of then Futurama specifically, which lives and dies on its sci-fi premise, was that because up until that point I don't believe you had worked on a lot of sci-fi at that point. Was that a genre that as a director and as a visual storyteller was kind of exciting and freeing for you, and what was possible and how much you could push the boundaries and get away with and kind of visually have fun with?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love sci-fi shows, and I'm a big sci-fi fan. So yeah, an opportunity to work on and be funny at the same time is great, because just like it enables you to do a lot of kind of like technology parody while you're designing stuff. And I'm trying to think if I can conjure up any examples of things I came up with. But anyway, it's being able to pay homage to some sci-fi films while you're doing it. The Mutants Are Revolting. There were backgrounds for the previous episodes where they've gone into the sewer system, but there really wasn't a lot. And the machine that kind of was the center of the sewage thing was kind of up for grabs. And after reading the script and figuring out what the action would be associated with it, I don't know if anybody noticed this, but I made that the machine from Metropolis that becomes the beast Moloch. But it's so it was like I was able to pay an homage to Metropolis, and it really fit because both were underground devices that were enslaving their the people who worked on it.
Yeah, that's incredible, because I still to this day have not seen Metropolis, and I berate myself for doing so, because I studied film, so I should have. But alas, no, and Fritz Lang has eluded me.
It's like now I'm trying to think. Farewell to Arms. I got the vibe from the script that they were doing When Worlds Collide, so which is another favorite sci-fi movie of mine. So I asked if I could design the spaceship so it was kind of like a lateral kind of airplane kind of takeoff and landing rocket rather than a straight up and down rocket, so I could mimic all of that kind of ramp stuff that they did in When Worlds Collide. So it's like to answer your question is yes, it's like being able to do sci-fi and do it funny. That was heaven.
Is that a kind of, when you got towards the end of the run with Futurama, and at this point you knew that it was starting to come to an end, or at least you weren't going to get brought on for another season, did you feel that there was more that you still wanted to explore in terms of Futurama, or did it feel like, at least for yourself and what you wanted to explore creatively, it felt like a natural concluding point?
I can't say that I had any unfinished business with the characters or anything. I certainly enjoyed working on the episodes, and for being a primetime show with that kind of bifurcated production where animation was taking place in Burbank, and and all the writers and producers and such were on the West Side. It just sort of like it was a very, very kind of generous creative atmosphere. So I that's what I miss is working on that kind of show. That's not necessarily that Futurama was done.
One of the other questions that I had is in terms of not necessarily even the episodes you've directed, but just as a whole, do you have a favorite Futurama episode that comes to mind?
I think the Da Vinci, the Da Vinci one was just so demanding as far as coming up with, all of those devices. That one I think came out extremely well, and I have to give a shout out to my assistant director Alden Baroza. He was always game to take on a lot of that kind of like intense, creative. Oh man, it's just like anything that was like a sequence that was intense and really intense and required somebody put their thinking cap on and kind of shut out the world. He was really good at that. So he did that. He did a lot of the vehicles and a lot of the inventions and anything that kind of got in that Rube Goldberg kind of, this fits into that and that creates, are you familiar with the Rube Goldberg reference?
Yes, I am.
That's a pretty old reference. It's like he was really good at that. And then, of course, he created, Alden did a lot of heavy lifting on the Myrtleator in the Zoidberg episode.
Oh, right. Yeah. Oh, crazy. And that's such a 3D heavy scene as well.
Yes, it's like a whole sequence. It's like, it's the climax of that act is this incredible device. And I'll never forget, like when we showed the writers of this, what we had done with the Myrtleator, their response was, wow, we didn't think it was going to be that involved. I thought it was just going to be a couple things and it was going to be over. And it was like, well, what? Are you kidding me? It's just sort of like the script was screaming that it had to be an enormous set piece.
Did you find a lot of that in your time there? Were there instances that either, the writers have written something and you kind of take it and run with it and it's completely not what they had expected, for better or for worse? Was there a lot of room to kind of surprise each other in that respect?
They were always very generous, and I found that it's like I think that the best way to put that is that is the sequences sometimes that were suggested in the script seem like they needed kind of time they needed to be opened up a little bit, and they were pretty good about doing a rewrite that kind of helps slow down the action to give it a little more of a cinematic feel rather than having the kind of rat-a-tat-tat of sitcom writing and scene progression. So I think the very last one, the Assy Come Home episode, we ended up having to do a lot of revision merely because I had introduced so much time to the show and they seemed to have liked that. They had to kind of mend and condense a little bit around it. So that give and take did happen. And like I said earlier, it's like they were very generous creatively. And I think that answers your question.
Yeah.
Does that take you in the right direction?
Absolutely. You've done well to extrapolate from my wildly formed questions.
I just start talking so long. It's like I was like, now what did he ask? And was this pertinent?
I also, so here's one that I've been going through with a lot of the creatives that have come, because Peter mentioned this and was wonderfully vague, and it's intrigued me so ever since. Were you, Raymie, at any point a partaker in the Futurama Halloween parties?
Oh God, there was one. I did go to one, and I guess that was during. I hadn't worked at Rough Draft yet, so I was invited. I showed up. I don't know what productions were going on. Probably was Futurama, but I wasn't part of it then. But it was quite an evening. I was really glad I went to it. But do you know Craig Bartlett, this creator of Hey Arnold?
No, I obviously know Hey Arnold, but I'm not familiar with the name.
Okay, so the one, this guy kind of had a charmed existence. It's sort of like, whenever you go to lunch with him, it's just sort of like, there's a parking space like right in front of the restaurant, just like, if it was a scene in a movie, and he'd always get that parking space. Well, anyway, I was going to meet him at this rough draft party, and so we were supposed to show up around the same time. I get there, and I'm confronted by this dominatrix. This woman is shouting at me, and she wants me to bend over this this chaise lounge thing that she has, this black leather thing. And then she like proceeds to hit me really hard with a paddle on the ass. and it was just sort of like, I mean, it's like you get that tingly feel, like it's like, holy shit. It's just sort of like this was kind of like a, something to complain to HR about. And but anyway, it's like I get over to the bar, and there's Craig Bartlett already at the bar, and he's got his cocktail in his hand, and I said, oh my God, it's like, how did you get? Did what happened to you had just happened? What happened to me? Did that just happen to you? And he says, what are you talking about? And I said, well, as soon as you come in, there's the dominatrix, and you got to get spanked. And he said, no, I just walked in. So anyway, that was the thing that stood out for me at that party. But they had it was like fantastic costumes. It's just sort of like, you can't beat having animation people dress up for Halloween. It's just like they put a lot of effort into that stuff, and it with great results. But that's about as wild as my anecdotes get. For the Halloween party.
My great takeaway from that is you were yelled at to bend over, and you did.
Yeah, I did. She was very convincing.
I like the idea that you go back and she's just not there. That was just
yeah. It was like, well, she had to get her 10-minute break. I think that might have been part of the agreement.
That's fan. That was not what I was. Good. I have more questions than answers about this party, but that's like one of the layers of the onion have been unraveled. And I think over time, the more people I talk to, I'll be talking to Eric Rogers next week, so he might be able to illuminate much more.
Oh, good.
Well, yeah. First of all, as I alluded to off mic, there is the portion of the show where we have to partake in a compulsory Futurama voice. Which, as I mentioned, is a love-hate relationship for everyone in the show except me. I adore it, and I think that's why I force it on everyone. Have you had a chance to potentially think about what character you might do a flawless impression of?
Man, it's like I haven't come to a conclusion about it, but I know it's, my wife always tells me, it's like, wow, all you animators are such great mimics. And certainly when we're pitching sequences and stuff, we take a stab at doing the voices. But I'm drawing an utter blank right now. Like who? It's like, they're all very distinctive. But,
I'm just trying to think.
Yeah, I wish my daughter was here. I'd have her do the professor. Let's see. You know what? I have to go with the professor, and I'll just say, I'll have to just do his line. Good news, everyone.
Great.
Take it or leave it. I can't think of any. I know. I bet if I put my mind to it, I'll go, oh yeah, I do a great fill in the blank.
What I like about that is that that's like a very LA accent Farnsworth, which I'm so intrigued by, and I need that episode now, especially coming off British Farnsworth that we just had a few weeks ago. Well, I guess look, I'll go and I'll give. You know what? I need to do something I haven't done in a while, because I always go to my go-tos, which are Farnsworth, Wormstrom, and you know what? I'll give you my favorite Futurama line in all existence, which is Morbo in windmills do not work that way.
That's good.
It's just a lot of screaming, so it's kind of a cheat, but No, I just relived that episode the other week, and I think it might be my favorite line.
Yeah, I remember Morbo I could do. I remember him saying, chit chat achieved when he was hosting that show at the beginning of is it that Da Vinci? I forget.
Is it Good Morning Morbo?
It was the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire parody.
Oh, right. Well, he hosts so many shows. It's hard for me to keep track.
Exactly. That's right.
Raymie, is there anything that you're working on at the moment or that is coming up that you would like to spruik? I'm sure I can think of the Australian equivalent of where to find it and how to watch it.
It's like I hesitate to. Well, I'll just tell you, I hesitate to push this, but I had this epiphany that the origin of Futurama was very similar in a certain way to the origin of Space 1999, which is a huge sci-fi thing for me. I love Space 1999. And I made a video using clips from the shows that I directed. And I made it for my website, but it's called Futurama 1999. And it's just an opening sequence as if Futurama were Space 1999. I'll put it that way.
And that's all.
And the reason I hesitate is that it's just like the technical, the resolution. I was not able to. I was not able to get the greatest resolution that I wanted on the special pieces that I had added to it. So it's a little low res, but if you look at it on your phone or something, you probably won't even notice.
And is that, if I'm right, RaymieMuzquiz.com?
Yes, I think that's one of my email addresses, but it's also www.raymie.net.
Raymie.net. Look, I'm gonna look at this while we're talking. There you go, folks. It does work. You just need Flash Player, which is fine. So yeah, Raymie.net to go see. Oh my God, it's starting. I gotta. You put music on there. You didn't tell me that there was music.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I have a friend who did all the music. Oh shoot, now I can't even think of his shows. Anyway, a very good composer. He made this a powerhouse kind of.
And also
theme for my website. Unless
IMDb is once again lying to me, which seems to be a 90% possibility that it is. Were you working on as a producer, I believe, or for the new Rocko's Modern Life movie that's meant to be coming out?
No, that was a sister production that was happening in the same floor, and we're sharing some same staff. But I was there being supervising producer on the Hey Arnold, the Jungle movie. Yes,
I do have that as well, which came out in 2017. Well, look, if it's one thing I've taken away from this show is that you haven't done half the things that they say you've done. And I'm quite upset with that.
Yeah, it's like I've been working for 3 years. You think I would have done all of that.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly go through it. So, everyone, if you would like to contact us for any reason, you can do so by emailing us at babybeardmedia@gmail.com. We have a presence on social media. Our faces are on Instagram. We have Twitter and Facebook at babybeardmedia. And if you would like to help us out, best way you can do that is to go on to what will soon be gone, iTunes, because they're getting rid of iTunes now, and what will be the podcast app, and give us a rating, a 5-star review. It helps us be popular boys and girls and be seen by more and more people, which is what we want. And finally, once again, thank you so much, Raymie, for coming on the podcast. It's been a fantastic hour.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm always grateful for the interest.
And until next week, where we will be interviewing writer Eric Rogers for the podcast, I have been Sean, and, well, you've been Raymie, haven't you?
24/7.
All the time. I always neglect to tell the person that usually that's how we sign off. And I forget until the moment that I throw it on them, which is pretty much half this podcast. So I appreciate it. Cheers, Raymie.
Cheers.